Welcome to Talking Jazz. My guest today is saxophonist, multi-instrumentalist, producer Jay Rodriguez, and he's talking to me from New York, and we're going to explore his music and his career and a lot of his production credits. It's so fun to have you. Welcome,
Oh,
Jay.
thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, Monica.
We're going to listen to some of your music, and we're going to start with one that's from an album called The Brooklyn Connection. So I guess we're going a little bit into your history and where you come from. Give us a quick backdrop. Where do you come from, and
Oh,
how
yeah.
did you get into this jazz thing?
I was born in Colombia, South America, in Barranquilla. And so I came here with my immigrant parents. We're all immigrants in 1970, and we settled in the Lower East Side, New York. I grew up there between there and Weehawken. I was around at that time. Music education was in a lot of the schools. There was no choice. I think public schools had a lot of programs I was lucky to start playing, to be exposed to clarinet. First grade, I was around it, and it was really great at that age. A few years later, I ran into Paquito de Rivera's father, who taught Paquito, obviously, and he lived nearby, and he started giving me lessons for free, like 5 days a week. He was an older man at the time, so he gave me more classical, not jazz, just playing the saxophone. And then I had a lot of peers, and music was a thing to do. We didn't have like internet, and so it was about belonging and trying to create a community. And by the time I was in 8th grade, I got to play with some really great musicians in the Latin scene, because a lot of the Latin arrangers living in New York, in the tri-state area, a lot of the arrangers, were jazz arrangers. And there's a lot of jazz influences already before, like Dizzy, and being in the right place at the right time, around the right things, exposed to all of that. And if you wanted to pursue music, that was the time. So I was around a lot of that. A lot of the hip arrangements, were like Oscar Hernandez, who's still around now, but a lot of those arrangements, Marty Scheller, who used to write for Broadway, also wrote for Ruben Blades, and all of these artists, Finding All Stars, all these wonderful musicians, and they were all jazz musicians. And I got to play with Tito Puente, like around that time. I got to meet Tito and Ray Barretto later on. So early on, I was around it, and I knew I was going to be around it. But I also like to improvise. This was sometimes I would play flute in some of the Latin bands, the music called charanga, which is based on the French contradance kind of style. So it's percussion with violins and flute, very interesting instrumentation by way of Cuba. And there was a really wonderful flautist named Jose Fajardo who played this very well. And he played the 5-key flute, the Baroque. That was the French system. So they would play these beautiful things for trills. And so I was around the music a lot. And I said, oh, wow, their forms, their things. So I fell in love with it. And then, of course, I fell in love with jazz. 10, 11, I had exposed to John Coltrane. I had a teacher who was like, I heard Charlie Parker. I was like, oh my God. And then there was there's a big scene in the Dominican artists. And that's a whole other style of music. It's still Latin based. Everything's arpeggiated, based on the accordion influence that came in from Germany and all these places. All of Latin America has accordion, like, all the way down. In Colombia, it's vallenato, which is like, like the blues of Latin, of the Caribbean coast of Colombia. So that was part of it. And in the Dominican Republic, they use that as well. The accordion, I guess, is a portable, it was a new instrument at the time, portable, like the guitar. So it's interesting. So accordion in the Caribbean. The saxophones imitate a lot of the movement. A music called Perico Ripiao. So I played a lot of saxophone with Dominican bands. My freshman year of high school, I was playing with some famous bands, and then, so I'd go back and forth. And saxophone was a big part of that instrumentation. Again, and there were some really wonderful musicians in that scene who, again, living in New York, so they were exposed to jazz things. But then I got more serious when I started going to high school. There was Billy Charlap. I met in high school along with John Gordon. I introduced John Gordon. I told him about Phil Woods. He had not met Phil Woods. He became like Phil Woods' like best student, right? So we all studied with Phil. Again, I was just in this beautiful place, and I couldn't, not a choice in the matter.
I think that's the case for most of us. It's not really a choice. It's
Yeah.
something that draws you in and you have to do it. And I usually tell any students, when they ask, if you don't have that drive and you have to do it, do something else, because then it's not worth
Yeah,
it.
I don't know. I have a 13-year-old son. He was asked to do a rehearsal today, and he's not sure. I was like, you know what? I gotta leave him alone. I gotta let them, when it comes, it comes. And if it's meant to be.
And I love that comparison to a language, because that's exactly, and it's a very universal one. You're coming from
Yes.
Colombia, I come from Germany, and we come together.
No.
That brings us to that first tune. So you call it the Brooklyn Connection, right? And that's a very international collaboration you have on that, called A Love's Reflection. I hear Middle Eastern tinged vocals on there, and it's in Japan, and you're producing it. How should we listen for this one? What's the important things to point to?
I was working with my friend Falu Gunisha, who's nominated for a Grammy. She's Hindi. We became friends because we started touring We did a tour with Jason Miles and Mike Clark, Gregory Porter Jr. I mean, across the states. Yeah, Jason Miles and DJ Logic, and she was the guest as well. And it was, really interesting. Before I took some lessons with Steve Gorn, I played some bansuri, so I really fell in love with Hindi classical music as well. Like we all, like artists, we all love all the music. So I took some lessons with Steve Gorn, and I still play some bansuri. But it's such, it's a whole other world. And then so at the time I was also trying to understand the message of belonging and the message of understanding and acceptance. In music, there's none of that. We don't have any differences. And the way I feel about the music was like, okay, I remember putting together a Latin thing, and I said, Falu, sing on this, and she's like, oh, wow, so she goes, that's the first time I ever heard it. It was not even like world music. I hate that term, world music. I said, what can I do here? There's a bass line that I liked. Teru started playing on bass, and then I did some drum. I was also into the technological aspects of the music. So I said, how could I make this sound organic and cool? And I'll play I wanted to do this kind of bossa nova, slow, cool saxophone kind of approach. And I wanted to see what I could do playing halftime across and what would happen if she sang her heart out in a very musical way. And I said, what do you think about this? I think I called it Love's Reflection after we spoke, because I heard her sing and I was like, this is so gorgeous. It had to do with life. And at the time, I was, my son had just been born, all of the things that we do as artists. And I think it reflects that time. There's another track from that record that we'll talk about later, but it's like that. It was about layering. And I also started understanding more about being able to do things from home, like recording pre-production. That was my first pre-production kind of stuff where I got really involved in it. So it was very exciting for me to do that, to know that I could do that. That's what that record reflects.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Love's Reflection. I love that term. This is the Brooklyn Connection. Features Falu Shah on the vocals, as you said, and Teru Nakamura on the bass, and the rest of it is all Jay Rodriguez layering and putting it together. So let's have a listen. Here we go. That
What
was
did
a Love's Reflection by my guest today, Jay Rodriguez, who you heard on saxophones, but also on piano and drums, programming, of course, composition. So, multi instrumentalist, multitasker. You know, when we head to this next live recording, I was actually going to ask you a little bit, especially for woodwind instruments, you always expect to play all kinds of instruments, right? And in my front line, I have Jamie Baum, who focuses on
yes.
flute, and she often talks about how she would be expected to double on saxophones too. You know, sometimes it's good to drill in on one and be really good, but on the
Hmm.
other hand, it's the breadth of being able to provide this to get more work and be more involved. Give us a little insight on woodwind players on doubling, you know, and how hard it is or how that works.
For me, again, it was something that I started very young, 10. I started on clarinet and I was always enamored by the flute players, like, wow, that's cool. And then at 10, I switched to saxophone, like I had a saxophone teacher. I fell in love with all the instruments. So I kept on practicing that. Then flute, like at 10 or 11, also became a thing. And in Latin bands, I really loved the idea of having flutes, of being able to play a flute solo. I was like, oh my God, so cool. I mean, I loved when flute players played in Latin music. I thought, can I play saxophone and then play flute and a melody? I thought it was my job, to do both. If I
Mhm.
wanted to do it, then why not? It was going to help. When I got to performing arts, which is now LaGuardia, I met a lot of other players who didn't double, but they played flute. I had great piano players. They were very serious about their craft. Some prodigies for sure in the classical world. Eleanor Beinman, remember her? It's a really great Bach. She did a whole thing on the Brandenburg Concerto for two pianos. She's got an album out. We're all friends to this day. But I just remember wanting to play these instruments and wanting to get better at them. And as I got older, I was happy because I was able to play them better. But then what's really great is that I was able to study seriously more flute, and get a better flute and get a better clarinet. Now I have a really beautiful bass clarinet. And actually during the pandemic, I focused a lot on clarinet playing because I was called to do a lot of contemporary classical music that I didn't, it kicked my butt. So I got better at it. So having the foundation really helped me. And I just thought how cool, how interesting. It also helped my composition and the way that I hear things. It helps me to really understand how to write for the instrument and to think, oh my God, the flute is built in such a way, that it creates this voices. And then you have clarinet. I understood for the first time why the clarinet was such an important integral part of the orchestra with all the different ranges and how it blends. Now I'm falling in love with the orchestration aspects of it. For me, it was just like a given. I also was trained to like fall into be able to sub and be like a musician that could play well flute. And I wanted to even I have friends who play flute now as saxophonists. I still focus on my objective being that when I play flute, I want to sound like a flute player,
Right.
not like a saxophone player that plays flute. I could tell when people, they just do it at a certain level. And for me, it was like a real undertaking because I fell in love with it. For me, I made the time, personal choice. Now, but I completely understand what Jamie speaks of and how it's cool to focus. I really wish I could, but after a while, once you start doing it, start getting called, then I have no choice. Flute, saxophone, I'm good. Clarinet has always been my toughest. It's the most
Mhm.
unforgiving.
It's good to point out, that it's not the same thing, blowing in
No,
this or blowing this. It's
no.
different techniques, especially with the flute.
The breath is still the same, but the air pressure changes.
And so this Ghost Dancer tune that we're going to listen to, that's actually from a live recording. And I remember it well because we were in the studio at the same time and you were at Dizzy's recording, and that's actually interesting too. So when we listen to this Ghost Dancer, realizing, okay, this was done live on stage, nobody has the safe net in the studio of, oh, I made a mistake, I can redo this. What goes on the stage goes on the record. So in Ghost Dancer, anything specific you want to point
Well,
out?
one, it was a real honor to work with Larry Willis, who has been called home, of course, Billy Harper. Well, I studied with Larry Willis. I played with him with the Fort Apache band, and I also met him at the New School. I've seen him a lot and seen him play trio, and it was wonderful to have him on the date. Billy Harper, who's a great hero, a great legendary tenor saxophonist. It was going to be George Garzone. I had contacted George, and then George said he could, and I was going to get Hal Galper, who I'd studied with, was going to play piano, and I was trying to I just wanted to work with some of my heroes and teachers, be really good to bring together some interesting things of great artists that probably would never have met to play together. So I thought that. But anyway, it ended up being Billy Harper thing. And then George said, oh, I could have done that. I was like, Billy Harper is cool. He was here, so it was great to see Billy and have him play. And I said, oh, great, because I wanted to have another woodwind so I can play another instrument to create these colors. And then I had Billy Martin, who's a drummer, Medeski Martin and Wood. We know each other for many years. So I think it's about relationships. You know, I know these musicians, J.T. Lewis, who I had worked with before, a really great drummer, a studio cat here in Brooklyn. And Billy Martin said, I wanted to have two drums. But Billy's like, no, I want to play percussion. Would have been nice to have two drums because I was really listening to a lot of Ornette and a lot of this openness. And I wanted these two drums at first. He goes, no, let me play percussion. And decided to play what he does. You know, it was really interesting. I was listening a lot to Eric Wheeler, who's a younger cat who's been playing a lot with different cats, really great young musician. And it was just a really great experience, you know, to be there. They gave me an off night at Dizzy's and the place was packed and people were loving it. And it was a great turnout the last minute. I was really happy and grateful to Lincoln Center for, you know, for Dizzy's. I haven't been able to go back. I don't know the politics but I was like, yo, I want to do my second anyway. I was supposed to do one before in June, the pandemic hit and then we couldn't do it. They don't have any, you know, reason to hire me again, God forbid. I haven't heard back from them, but it would be nice. I wanted to do a second record. I was going to do it with Chano Dominguez. Again, it's about new relationships, new friends. The Ghost Dancer is two pieces. Ghost Dancer is a piece that I wrote based on Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, a really great book. People should read it, understand the plight of the American Indian in America. It's about the Trail of Tears, about humanity and love, you know. And so Ghost Dancer was the hope the American Indians had in our society. They created a thing that would protect them called the Ghost Dance. So I thought about Ghost Dance, reminded me of that special gift to believe in oneself. I mean, it's the hardest thing in life. And then the other side of it was Congo Call, which is a piece by Prince Lachey, featured in the new movie Free Jazz, a new movie that just came out about free jazz. Prince Lachey, Sonny Simmons had a group. They influenced like Ornette Coleman and, you know, they were friends. They're part of the free movement. That second part of this, that's his piece. And I adapted it. That's why I called Ghost Dancer and Congo Call. And it's like a suite of sorts. And I decided to play flute because I thought the flute part on it was so cool that there's flute and alto on it. Because I said, let me make it with flute and tenor. And I had Billy play.
So let's have a listen. So here's Ghost Dancer from the Live at Dizzy's album released in 2018 with my guest Jay Rodriguez on the flute and a great crew behind him. Ghost Dancer combined in a medley with Congo Call. And it's from the Live from Dizzy's album by my guest today, Jay Rodriguez, who you heard on flute on this track. We're gonna go to Italy now and have another great life adventure when we go to Verona, actually, for Thingamajig. And you got the great Joe Valdez on there, so you definitely have to tell us about this excursion to Italy and getting to play with these legends.
I met Chucho with Roy Hargrove back in the day, and I met him during a Crisol big band thing. And Roy had asked me to play baritone sax. I played in this big band, and I played a couple of small gigs. I met him, and he said, "Oh, Jay, you should come to Cuba." And it was like '98. Man, I'd be honored. I said, I don't know, He goes, "Man, I'd love to have you." So he decided to bring me. He said, "Oh, Jay, I want you to come no matter what." I went in '98, and I had some family there on my sister's side. I said, "Wow, what a great opportunity. I really need to connect with all these artists." Of course, it was a great jazz festival in Cuba, very well known art of the Plaza, in Havana. And Roy was going with Crisol, and all of a sudden everybody was going. And as soon as everybody's like, "Who's going?" I remember somebody told David Sanchez, all of a sudden David Sanchez wasn't going to go. All of a sudden, "No, I'm going." Everybody's going to El Negro. Everybody's and we were all headed to Cuba. And we got to play. And we got, so we got to know each other. He was really sweet. I had lived in Italy in like 94 to 95, working on scores. I had some grants. So I had a connection with booking agents there. And I said, "Oh, wow, this would be really cool." And I said, "Well, why don't we put together a quartet?" And I called him up and said, "Chucho, are you around? Luckily he's around. And he wanted to play. And I actually, right before after Cuba, I actually went to my hometown of Barranquilla, where I was born in Colombia. And I was asked to do the jazz festival there. And Chucho and I played duo. I forgot about that. That's how. So we ended up playing duo from the hometown that I was born in. And what's cool about Cuba, though, is I got to play with Irakere, and I met some of the artists who are here now. Me and Maraca played flute for something, and Maraca's a virtuoso, an amazing flautist. So it was really great to be able to try to keep up. But I have a very different style at the time. It was great. So then Chucho said, "All right," making a long story short, I decided to, I said, "Can you come?" I have Ratso Harris on bass.
Ratso is a dear friend of mine from Indianapolis.
I love Ratso. He was one of my theory teachers. He goes, "Are you sure?" Ratso's like, I said, "Yeah, man, I heard you play with Joe Lovano." And it's funny, I studied with Joe Lovano. And at the time, I studied with Joe, and I studied with Ratso Harris and Kenny Werner. They had a quartet, Tom Rainey. I was studying. I just wanted to get a grasp. Coming from the Latin scene, really trying to understand. I had studied with Phil Woods, understood certain things about the mechanics of the jazz thing, but not having the amount of experience that I needed to carry my message I thought, then you realize it's about acceptance and understanding and self-confidence. There's a maturity that occurs to some of us, and I needed that. And I remember Ratso saying, "Man," he said to me, "just like, I said, "Man, I feel like I can't play." He goes, "Man, just play. You know how Train played, like 24 hours, just like, lock yourself in the room." And I did it, my lip. I said, "Ratso, you remember?" He goes, "I told you to do what?" But it's funny because I just recorded with Ratso last Monday. I was playing baritone, speaking about doubling. It was all baritone. And I played one flute thing for some really complex music, Latin, jazzy, but kind of monkish. He was the bass player on that. So I'm still really good friends with Ratso. But he decided, Ratso had broken part of his finger. He had a cast. They put the cast on in such a way that he could use his thumb. He'll tell you the story. A very interesting, challenging time. Ratso is kind of a little accident prone sometimes. That was the case that day. And so we went to Europe, and I was like, "Oh my God." He goes, "Jay, I'm like, are you going to be okay?" Anyway, we ended up going to Europe. Victor Jones, we had a wonderful time. And I said, "How can we get Chucho to play free?" We were talking about free music. Again, there was an understanding of playing free. What happens if we just start playing? Thingamajig was a thing that we came up with, this kind of hit. That was the only thing that happens. Everything else is free, kind of sketches. We had a bunch of sketches, and we said, "Let's do this." So it was very interesting to experiment with quote unquote Latin kind of approach. Somebody asked me recently, "Oh, did Chucho play free?" I was like, "Yeah." I never heard him play. I was like, "Yeah, well, just play." Really playing very open on this, almost like Don Pullen, if this kind of. So I said, "Wow, I learned something about the recording." When I listened back to it, even now, when I sent you the music, I was like, "Wow, interesting that he's playing completely free," because all of a sudden, people are aware that free is cool again. It seems to me that there's more of this. Maybe it's just I'm more aware of it. I was working with Mark Rebo, and I was working with, this James Brandon Lewis, all these musicians, or maybe it has to do with the climate and political climate that we're living in that adheres to the idea of the message as artists that we have, black and white, but the message of humanity and so on. Anyway, I gravitated to that.
You were ahead of the times, seeing it. But you're right. I mean, I think we need to find new frontiers, new directions, and you definitely see that right now in jazz, this exploring and pushing the boundaries, because, one thing that we have to realize there's no going back to anything. When people tell me, let's go back to, or like after the pandemic, we'll go back to, we're not going back to anything. It's all moving forward. And this kind of approach is it. And I love that you were so ahead of the times. Well, I would say buckle up. Let's go to Italy, because we go super high energy here.
Look out!
So this is Thingamajig, Jay Rodriguez, and we'll hear Chucho Valdez on the piano, Ratso Harris on the bass, and Victor Jones on drums, and my guest today, Jay Rodriguez, on the tenor sax. Here we go. That was a piece called Thingamajig, and it was recorded live in Italy with our guest today, Jay Rodriguez, on tenor sax, leading a all-star group. We're going to go back. So live recording, there seems to be a theme. I see
I
that
know, I
building
know.
into the live interaction
Yeah,
and the live theme, and we're going to go back to
yeah,
Dizzy, where you recorded live.
yeah. That's where
And
the first studio track, that first one, I did a lot of production. And this next
mhm.
record that I just recorded recently, I'm so proud of the production and being inside. It's a very different experience. So I'm grateful for the live stuff. But yeah,
This one is interesting because it starts with drums and bass solo, right? The rule would be if you go in the studio, like never start with the bass solo because everybody starts talking. You start with that, and then it hints to my one and only love.
it's
And
interesting. Everybody hears that.
so tell us about that piece and how you came to arrange that and your philosophy of approaching something like
You
that.
know what's funny? For me, the whole thing, I had spent a little bit of time with Ornette Coleman and some of the rhythm section, Al McDowell, Al, and Tony Falanga from Primetime. And I was invited to Ornette's house, hang out. And for his birthday, we talked. I realized that he explained to me something very interesting. And it came to mind the idea of, do you ever see something in light? It's very bright, and you close your eyes and you see the imprint of what was there when you close your eyes of the object or the tree or right?
Mhm.
And you see like the leftover implant in your eye, left over, right? And it's very beautiful. This is the idea, I believe, with Harmolodics, with Ornette Coleman, where where the melody is so strong. So I wanted to write a beautiful melodic melody, play free across it, so that the melody is so strong
Mm-hmm.
that there's harmonic and harmony and chords, two different things. When chords exist on their own in certain types of music, they are function 5-1, and they function like Bach. They move. If you get rid of chords, like when you get to atonal music,
Mm-hmm.
chords have no meaning anymore. That's not really what you're listening for anymore, or it doesn't do that. It does if you're thinking about it, but the one thing that you do remember is the melodic aspect. So melodies are strong, and harmony is different. Harmony exists in and of itself on its own. So harmony is like the spirit of the music, the soul of the music, and chords are like a skeleton. Sometimes the skeleton leaves and all you have is freedom. But when you have a beautiful melody, it's a beautiful story. So I was in Australia. I remember when I wrote this, I was visiting a friend who was a singer-songwriter, and she had a bunch of classical things, and I was playing these kind of cantatas because I studied with Roland Hanna, and he had the 371 cantatas movement, all of the chorales, 371, and I just love very simple movement. I think for anybody who wants to saxophonist and or you just want to understand how harmony works and how things move, I think that's the greatest thing, the 371 chorales. Anyway, so that gave me these ideas. So I really started feeling about the movement. Hence, that whole thing with One and Only Love, it has that movement. Bach does it, everybody, ba, ba, but this kind of, but it really, I think it was a classical piece. I remember just writing every day. I was writing like a diary. So I'd write, like I still do that sometimes. I go on days when no matter what, I could be tired, I just write the first thing that comes to mind on the piano, off the piano, as an exercise every day. So I have a bunch of those, and this is one of those melodies, and it was an imprint left over. So this piece works on its own. Like I could play it really slow, like a ballad. The idea of having double time underneath, it's like Ornette reminded me, I was also inspired by science fiction. That song, What Reason, part of one of the songs that Ornette Coleman, so gorgeous and beautiful. It's vocal, him and Dewey Redman, and the melody is so beautiful. It reminded me of this ethereal, beautiful melody, an expression of life. And that's why I called it Your Sound, because it reminded me of the sound of humanity.
He definitely did that with the War Orphans too, just everything based on the melody and underneath. And it came out gorgeous and amazing. Of course, he had a wonderful ensemble. So I would say let's listen to it. We got the backdrop. We know about Life at Dizzy. So this is Your Sound. This was the recording Life at Dizzy. Features, of course, our guest today, Jay Rodriguez, on tenor sax on this one, and Billy Harper, and Larry Willis, Eric Wheeler, J.D. Lewis, Billy Martin. Here we go. This was your sound from the Life at Dizzy's recording. It featured my guest today, Jay Rodriguez. It was such a treat to have you. We'll close out with a solo saxophone piece, which is great. We will also have to think a little bit, what's next? Where are we going?
My next thing is I just recorded. I'm in the middle of about
Gotcha.
to start editing and mixing. I have a really great recording I just did featuring Alex Blake and Victor Jones. As a guest, I had Marvin Sewell, guitarist, and it was a reflection of the times when we've all been struggling with all the differences and the awareness of that things are not the same for the time being. The music community is very tight. The record I just recorded, I didn't know why I'm still thinking of a title. I thought about calling it Ghosts in My Room. I do a lot of different covers. I had played with Alex Blake and Victor Jones. They inspired me. I saw them playing many years ago with Pharoah Sanders as a trio in Europe. Wow, it was inspiring. So Alex Blake, of course, his trajectory as a great musician and artist was an honor to have them. Right now, I've been playing a lot with great Fred Wesley. Fred Wesley was a musical director for James Brown.
We have to move forward and just find our own voices and share that.
With him, I played funk. When I played with him, I realized that voice that he has with James Brown, that influence, the only people who do that so well are them. When I play with the rhythm section, he's had the same band forever. I get called because I can play that. I had worked with Prince's band back in the day, and I was able to understand the blues and that cry.
You know, it's been such a treat to have you and share your stories and your music, which is gorgeous, and actually going out on a solo saxophone piece. That's really special, and I hope you put that music out to the public. If not, I encourage everybody to get in touch with Jay Rodriguez.com or find them on the socials and just connect. Nancy with the laughing face is actually something that, you know, Frank Sinatra made popular. His wife was Nancy Coltrane. It's one of the most gorgeous ballad pieces. Here is Jay Rodriguez, solo saxophone in his studio in Rome, making it sound beautiful for us. Thanks, Jay, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Monica. Love you very much. I can't wait to hear your new stuff. Kicking it. Thank you so much for doing a great service to our community and for doing the great work that you do.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you for listening to Talking Jazz today. My guest was composer, multi-reedist, saxophonist Jay Rodriguez. Tune in for Talking Jazz every Thursday at 11 a.m. and every Monday at 7 p.m. right here on WETF 105.7 FM in South Bend, Indiana, or online at WETFthejazzstation.org. Also find videos of previous shows on YouTube on the Monica Herzig channel. That's MONIKAHERZIG. Subscribe to get the newest updates. Thank you for listening.